guys are in the real estate business, and you kind of have this specialty around homes that I guess float.
Well, we live on Lake Union in a houseboat, so it was a natural transition for us to dive into the on-water market, so to speak.
Sure, no pun intended, right?
Yeah,
or totally
exactly.
intended. So let's just, before we get too far into this, you talk about houseboats or floating homes, and I think most people think about, Lake Union, right? It'd be probably isn't that the second biggest place of floating homes in the world?
Yeah, it's one of the hottest locations for floating homes. There's some in San Francisco as well. That's probably the largest area, with close second being Seattle.
And so when you start looking at all these, maybe define the difference between, I guess, waterfront, floating homes, and then houseboats, because they're very different.
Oh, absolutely. There are actually three specific ways that you can live on the water. One would be a floating home, and floating homes are characterized by being anchored or moored in Seattle waters, being more or less permanently attached to utilities, and are taxed as personal property. And they're usually in a condo or a co-op location. There are exceptions to that, but that's very typical.
So you're thinking, when I imagine this, we're talking Lake Union, kind of right along the east side of the water there.
Yeah, there are actually floating homes all around the lake. The highest concentration of them is on the East Lake area, but there's also quite a few on the West Lake area.
Also in Portage Bay.
Oh yeah.
There are quite a few in there.
Cool. So these are the floating homes. These are more fixtures.
Yeah, they're basically a permanent attachment. They're connected to the dock, usually with anchors or chains, or some of them are even on hydraulic pistons to deal with the wakes and waves that come by.
And the lake also raises and lowers in the fall and the spring, so about 2.5, 3 feet. So they have these hydraulics that go up and down.
That's when you live on if you have the friends with the hydraulic ones, you're like, man, we need those.
Yeah.
You get neighbor. That's how you keep up with the Joneses out there on floating homes, huh? Is with the hydraulic lifts.
Yeah, it's called connection envy.
Yeah, no kidding. So that's one way, right? Is kind of these floating homes.
Yes.
And then waterfront, I think, is much easier to think of.
Yeah, and everybody knows what a waterfront home. It's a home on land that happens to have beach access or water access on the property. The other type of living environment is houseboats, which are basically a type of a vessel.
It's a boat.
It's a boat.
It has a propeller, and you can drive it around.
Correct. And you can live aboard any kind of vessel. It could be a yacht, it could be a trawler, it could be a sailboat, or it could be a houseboat, which is just another type of vessel.
And so these houseboats that we're talking about they're not they're mobile, but they're not exactly seaworthy in some cases. I'm looking at pictures of these, and they really look like houses. They have siding.
Right. You're not going to go water skiing behind these. They don't have powerful engines. They're basically designed to be able to move from one marina to the next marina and then be more or less connected as a live-aboard vessel at that marina. So the engines are designed to move around, but not to necessarily go out and cruise on Puget Sound.
Sure. So when you start thinking about these three, and just to kind of price them out, just kind of waterfront, I suppose, homes versus floating homes versus these houseboats, what are some of the price ranges that you see? Waterfront homes, of course, I think you're looking at anywhere from Bill Gates' house at, gosh knows, $100 million. And then down to maybe, there's like $1 million house, I suppose, on Lake Washington. Maybe not anymore. I don't know.
Yeah, the waterfront properties are typically pretty expensive. Even the smallest of waterfront properties is going to be close to $1 million. Floating homes can also be pretty expensive. Lower-end floating homes are typically around $400,000, $500,000, and they're pretty small when you get down to that price range. You're probably talking about 400 or 500 square feet, basically a cabin on the water. And then,
and then how high do those go up? Because if you have a boat and you go through Lake Union, and you see some of these homes on the very ends, they are massive.
Yeah, they can be fairly large. I think some of the largest floating homes are in the 2,500 to 3,000 square feet. And yeah, they can go up, 3 million plus, so they can be pretty pricey.
Wow. And then you get into basically buying a boat.
Yes.
And so I guess again that can be. Tell me a little bit about that. I mean, when you look at the price range on these on the houseboats.
So they tend to be a little more affordable from a purchase price standpoint, but you also have to consider that there are other costs involved when you buy a houseboat. You typically are paying a monthly fee for moorage. You're renting the space in most cases, although there are some slips that you can buy, but typically the space is rented or leased.
Mm-hmm.
The price ranges on houseboats go from low end. I've seen $25,000 for a very inexpensive houseboat, up to multi-million. I mean, literally, there are houseboats out there that are as big as the floating homes, but the difference is they actually have engines, they have navigation stations, they have 12-volt systems, they have nav lights.
I mean, there's yachts you could certainly live on.
Sure.
You don't have to go too far to find them.
Exactly.
And so when somebody is, I suppose, talking to you guys about these, I mean, you're looking for a real estate agent, and you guys, I mean, as you said, you guys you don't just do sell houses or help people buy houses that are floating or on the water. I mean, you work with other types of properties as well. But when somebody gets this, I suppose, itch that only living on the water will scratch, do you tend to think that there is a difference in the type of real estate agent they should be looking for?
Oh,
And what should they be looking for?
yeah, absolutely. The experience necessary to do these is way different than your average real estate broker would have. When we purchased our houseboat, there literally was no one out there with any kind of experience, and we did so many things wrong. It's frightening, some of the things. I mean, we were actually hiring a captain and driving the boat around before we owned it, which would have been a real disaster should have anything happened. And no one was there to tell us these things. No one was there to talk about how the survey works, how the inspection process works, how they're closed as a vessel, how you do registration, and so forth. So it's a much more complicated process.
And ours was actually, along with the rest of these, were listed for decades on the multiple listing, and real estate brokers sold those until March of this year. The multiple listing service and Department of Licensing figured out their boats. So
They figured it out, huh?
they figured out their boats.
That they're floating and have engines and can move.
So they've all been pulled off of the multiple listing service. So we are actually vessel dealers with Seattle Houseboats or Special Agents Houseboats.
Interesting.
As well.
Linda and Kevin Bagley join us, owner and managing brokers of Special Agents Realty. So, guys, what is the process? I mean, let's just go through the process of a houseboat, because you guys brought some of these listings, and it's fairly reasonable to buy one of these. What is the process? Here's a houseboat for $169,000. You can live on the water.
It's actually a very inexpensive way to experience waterfront that you can actually put your toes in. It's a completely different process, though, than buying property on land. You're looking at buying a vessel, so you are not going to have a home inspection. You're going to have a survey. And a survey is conducted by a licensed surveyor who understands vessels and the systems that go along with that. When you have a houseboat inspected, it's literally hauled out of the water into a dry dock. They inspect the hull, they inspect the bottom, they inspect all the interior components, and vastly different than what you'd go through on a house.
And when somebody so when you look at these, I guess you could buy a boat that's maybe already settled into a spot, right? Like these. I mean, these are kind of like already there. But do people just go buy a boat and then move it into a spot and call it a houseboat too? I mean, I would imagine there's lots of different ways to do this.
So the term houseboat is one of those kind of vague terms. It's like trying to identify what's a trawler. There are a variety of styles, and it really goes, in gradations from something that looks very, very much like a house to something that looks a lot more like a boat. And there's no real set definition for a houseboat. So
Just a boat you live
yeah,
on.
it's a boat, and they tend to look more like a house. But really, that's the only defining thing that you can say is different than any other vessel. Is they kind of look more like a house. Their intended purpose is to be used as a full-time residence or a part-time residence. Some people, get them as vacation places.
Sure. I mean, because a lot of these, and how big are these? Because I'm looking at a few. I mean, how big are these typically?
They range in size from anywhere around, smallest is 250 square feet up to there are some very large, close to 5,000 square foot houseboats.
So once
there.
again, I mean, the entire gamut of size,
Exactly.
top to bottom.
Yeah. It really spreads across, all price ranges and all sizes, depending upon what's available.